Hello, this is William from RiskWise Consulting. I'm going to give you a quick lesson on how to create a construction risk assessment. This is a basic risk assessment document that I've just put together. You can see the risk matrix in the top corner here, and I've basically got the tasks, the hazards, who would be harmed, the level of risk, control measures, and the risks following the control measures. I start off by putting in some of the details here, the company name, the project location, completed by myself, and today's date. There are a number of different stages to completing a risk assessment. The first, you start off by identifying the hazards. You can do this in a number of ways. Ideally, walk around the place of work or the area that the work is taking place in. Very important to speak to the people that are completing the work and check on the internet and various other resources for any more information that you may be able to find about the work that you're doing. I've just taken an example of some work to do some demolition. I've listed the type of activities that are going to happen here, and I've also then listed all the likely hazards. These are just some examples. Once we've done that, we need to consider who's at risk. Well, often got to consider the public if you're involved in construction, operatives completing the tasks in question, visitors to sites, the people that may not be used to the site or understand the risks associated with the site, younger workers of particular importance, other site workers just working close to the works, those that may be disabled or unable to complete certain tasks, and migrant workers that may not understand the risks. These are just some of the people involved. I've made a list here: scaffold, falling from height, operatives, other site operatives, all on site for dust. These are various different hazards affected by the different people. Once you've identified the hazards and also who's to be harmed or likely to be harmed, it's important to evaluate the risk. It's important to remember that risk is a combination of likelihood, the likelihood of it to happen, and the severity. So what would happen? What's the likely outcome that would come of that if the event was to be realised? So first, assess the risk as you find it, for each of the risks identified. Remember to consider both likelihood and severity, as I've said above. The risk matrix I showed you earlier will help you do that. And there are no wrong or right ways in assessing risk. It's up to you to decide this, but remember, you may need to justify this. You can see here I put the risk rating here. So essentially, just from this matrix here, in this situation, and this is purely with the example that I'm using, I considered a fall from height, given that there was no edge protection, etc., to be very, very likely, and given the height, a major injury was likely. And so I typed in 20. You can see if I type in 20 here, it changes it to red. So likewise here, collapse of a scaffold. I felt the scaffold was there was a possibility of likelihood of collapse because it was I felt that it was possible. It wasn't very likely. It's been reasonably well constructed. However, it was still a major injury was likely if it did collapse. So I felt that was a 12. Really, it's up to you to make your own decisions on the risk rating levels. But you can see how that's put together. Okay, once we've worked out the initial risk level, we need to then work out the precautions. Consider the following precautions in order. There's a list of different precautions below, following principles of prevention. So the idea is really to eliminate, reduce risk if it's not possible to eliminate it, reduce access to it. So try and isolate the issue, less exposure. So protect the masses, not the individual. So in the case of edge protection, try and provide edge protection rather than a full arrest system which just protects the individual, or certainly try and extract dust away from a problem rather than provide people with dust masks. Provide training, and PPE is really a last resort to consider. Going back to the risk assessment, I've put in some control measures here. You can see, for example, down here, I've decided to use a robotic breaker. This completely eliminates the risk. That's obviously the ideal, but sometimes that's not possible. I've scaffold, so I've put in control measures for the scaffold to be adapted to allow work access so that people can't fall off, and also fitted with suitable edge protection. I've then added the new risk levels following the precautions that I've added. Um, it's worth remembering that often when you're looking at the severity and likelihood, it's easier to reduce the likelihood of something happening, i.e. the likelihood of a scaffold falling over. If a scaffold falls over, the severity still remains the same, and that's generally the case for most in most situations. The only situation where I've managed to reduce the severity is where I've helped eliminate it by using robotic breakers. So if there was a collapse, then I've reduced the severity of it because you're no longer in the area. But generally, it's the likelihood that tends to be affected. Following this, and as you have done, it's important to record your findings. By doing what you've just done in this recording, you will have recorded your findings. Ensure that it is dated and that the people affected by the works are aware of their findings. Ensure that you have saved this assessment. Finally, review your findings periodically, ideally within a year, but certainly when there are any changes to the work or the way the works are carried out. Thank you very much for listening to this. I hope it's been of help to you. If you go to riskwiseconsulting.co.uk, you will be able to find a copy of this for your own uses. Thanks.